Good afternoon. I'm Tammy Coleman-Epps, and I'm the Director of Media Relations and Social Media here at Prisma Health. We want to provide you with the best information to take care of your family. As South Carolina's largest healthcare system, our purpose is to inspire health, serve with compassion, and be the difference. This is an example of us trying to be the difference. We want you to know that as summer comes, we want you to be safe. We know that there'll be more trips. There'll be trips to the beautiful lakes and beaches of South Carolina, and there'll be summer camp. And so we put together a panel of Prisma Health experts to help you have the information to keep you safe. So on our panel, Dr. Jeremy Byrd is a primary care physician in the Upstate. Dr. Kerry Sease, who's a pediatrician in the Upstate. Dr. Spencer Robinson, one of our emergency medicine physicians in the Midlands, and Dr. Jeff Holloway, who's also pediatric sports medicine in the Midlands. We're excited to have them here today, and we'll answer a bunch of questions to keep you safe. So we'll start off with Dr. Byrd. Let me highlight him. Dr. Byrd, thank you for being here with us. We appreciate you taking the time away from your practice to be here. So first question, you know we're all going to be doing a lot of traveling this summer, and Memorial Day is coming too. If people are traveling, what first aid items should they bring?
That's a great question. I like the prepared person, somebody who's thinking ahead. The most common thing you're going to encounter outdoors is an allergic reaction. And so having some Benadryl handy is a super smart move. If you have kids, children's Benadryl as well as adult Benadryl. Can y'all hear me okay? Just to make sure.
We can.
Awesome. Sunscreen is something, making sure it's SPF 30 or above is something we forget. I forget all the time. But it's there's never a store too far away to add it to your first aid kit. So make sure you get some sunscreen. Something that, we all think about is water, but we just never pack enough water. And so, it sounds like a silly thing to have in your first aid kit, particularly if you need to wash a wound, or some fruit, particularly if you're traveling. It's just good to have extra water available. And then, I had one of my moms contact me last week. She had found a tick on her little one. And so, I think that's something also that we definitely need to think about, and like how we would remove a tick, of course. And so having a tick removal kit would be something I would have handy. And then, the last thing I think is maybe having some Dramamine, particularly if you're going to be traveling up in the mountains. I can't tell you how many family trips I wish I had that available. And that's just something to have handy in case somebody gets sick in the curvy mountains. Of course, all the normal stuff that, everyone imagines, like, having gauze, Band-Aids, antiseptic, this kind of thing are things that everyone already knows. These are just some extra things I like to add to my first aid kit.
I love that, but I've never heard of a tick removal kit before. Is that something you just get at like CVS or Walmart?
When I mean that is like some tweezers, of course, something to grab the tick, because you can't always do it with your fingers. That probably is the most important thing, really, and something to clean it out with. But yeah, that would be something I would think on. Just there, I think there are probably kits out there too, but I really meant just some tweezers. So good question.
All right, thank you. I was already on Amazon trying to find it. So, all right, here we go. We'll go to Dr. Robinson. Dr. Robinson, how can we exercise safely outside in the heat? And how can you tell if you're overheated?
Can you hear me okay, Tammy?
Yes, sir, we can.
All right, great. Well, the main thing that you want to, we live in South Carolina, right? And so it's starting to get pretty hot. It started getting into the 90s. And so I think the best thing that you can do is really kind of consider, if you're going to exercise, either do it in the morning or later in the evening, when obviously the temperature is a little bit cooler. The other thing that you can really pretty much do is obviously wear a hat, wear some sunglasses, try to protect yourself from the sun. And then I would really try to focus on wearing some clothing. If you're truly exercising outside, then you need something that's going to wick the moisture. Wearing cottons and things of that nature, they're going to become wet. That's going to expose. You're going to kind of further increase your exposure to being sunburned. So anything that's really going to wick the moisture away, I think is going to be beneficial. But I think the smartest thing that you can do is to try to exercise either earlier in the morning or later in the evening when it's not as hot.
And then how can you tell if you're overheated?
Yeah, so that kind of goes into this whole kind of continuum when you start talking about heat exhaustion, heat stroke, heat fatigue. The main thing, once again, the first thing it's you've got to be smart about when you're exercising. But if you kind of catch yourself in a situation to where you're exercising, you're starting to get nauseous, maybe you even vomited a little bit, those are usually some of your first signs or thirst. Those are some of your first signs of volume depletion and the fact that you might be getting dehydrated. Confusion usually comes much later in the course. That's when you start talking about when the sweating is starting to stop and you start getting confused, and we start worrying a little bit more about heat stroke. The main difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke is that change in someone's mental status. And so if you catch yourself, you feel your heart rate going up, you're starting to get nauseous, maybe you vomited, you're lightheaded, then you really need to be on high alert that you've maybe pushed it a little bit too far and you need to stop and really hydrate, something with, whether it's water, something with some balanced electrolytes like Gatorade or something of that nature. Those are the main things that I would, recommend for people to watch for.
Thank you. I think we probably all think we drink more water than we do, so we have to be really mindful of that. So I think both of you and Dr. Byrd are reminding us of that as we go into the summer. Now we're going to go to Dr. Sease. Dr. Sease, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon.
Do you have any tips on making traveling with your children less stressful?
So first of all, thanks for the loaded question, right? Traveling with your children is never not stressful. So I'll do my best to share some pointers. So if you're traveling by plane, I think it's really important that you talk to your kids about what's going to happen through security so that they kind of understand what's going to be going on and get them prepared for that. I think preparation with kids is always the best mode for anything to help decrease some of the stress. And then if they are 12 or over, they're going to have to take off their shoes. So make sure they have on shoes that are easy to get off and on, so that that's not going to cause stress. Have them layer in their clothes. They're going to take off their jacket to get that through security. It's cold on a plane sometimes. So thinking ahead and being prepared, give yourself plenty of time to get through security. Don't add added stress, to yourself by not getting there on time, and just knowing that there's likely going to be delays. For younger kids, if they're going to carry their own bag, make sure it's not too heavy, that they can actually carry it through the airport so they're not going to be kind of whining and crying throughout that time, or it's not too heavy for you to add on to yours if you end up carrying it yourself. And then you want to think about having snacks and water. We're going to be talking a lot about water. You can get dehydrated on a plane. So snacks and water, and then things to keep them entertained. So kind of the obvious stuff, but preparation, getting there in advance, making sure the kids know what to expect so that they're prepared and ready. If you're traveling in a car, plan for stops, right? Just put it into your timeline that you're going to have stops. Kids get restless. They're going to want to get up and move out. If they're strapped in their car seat, they're going to want to get up and move around a little bit as well. So just plan for those stops. Ideally, if you can, every couple of 3 hours to get up and let them stretch their legs and run around. Always make sure your child is in an appropriate car seat. They should be rear facing until they're at least 2, even longer, if they can. And then make sure that they're an appropriate belt positioning booster seat or high back booster seat. So talk to your pediatrician or family physician about appropriate car seats for them. And then snacks, toys, maybe limit the water in the car so you don't have to go to the bathroom all of the time. But again, making sure that you're staying hydrated while they're in there. And then think about music lists, games that you can play in the car. I think just preparation is probably the best way to prevent some of that stress.
Good, thank you, Dr. Sease. Dr. Holloway. All right, Dr. Holloway, it's summertime. The kids are out and about. Can you talk to us about what the top health hazards for kids are during the summer and how to prevent them?
Yes, so obviously we've talked about some of them already. Being outside encompasses a lot of different things, and I think a lot of recreational play that's not always supervised. So thinking through some of the ways to prevent them is thinking ahead. And so one of our big things with playground equipment is making sure you follow the rules, not do things that are dangerous in those situations. one study actually showed that parents trying to be cautious would slide down with their kids to help them, and that increased the risk of leg fractures by a significant amount. So things that you might think that you're doing to try to help, but can be dangerous. And then with activities outside, like riding scooters and bikes and things like that, we always want to make sure we're wearing helmets to prevent significant head injuries, and then always watching for things like concussions that could show up. So if your kid comes back home and just doesn't seem right, not feeling well, it can be a mixture of things between the dehydration, like Dr. Robinson talked about, to things like concussion. So being sure that we're mindful of that. And some of those during the summer don't come out as much because there's not as much cognitive demand during those times, but being mindful of that. And then I always think of sleep, because again, concussions can throw off your sleep, but making sure your sleep cycle stays on track as much as you can during the summer, so you don't get too far off, and especially at the end of summer, trying to make sure we're back ready for school.
Good deal. Thank you. Dr. Byrd. Dr. Byrd, okay, so it's warm outside and some of us have some conditions, heart disease or diabetes. How can the summer heat affect you differently, and what should people do to protect themselves?
So there's a common theme in what we're talking about, and that hydration is so important, but especially in the setting of diabetes and heart disease. I think it's just important to remember that the resilience has been decreased, and the body is amazing in its ability to adjust to the stresses it's put under. And so with diabetes in particular, you may be more likely to have an elevated blood sugar, because as you get more dehydrated, the blood sugar rises, which causes you to pee more. This is something that we, or urinate more. We see this a lot in our patients as a sign of diabetes, but that makes them more dehydrated. And so it just is kind of a vicious cycle. And so making sure you stay well hydrated and just trying to avoid those extremes, as we've already talked about. And the same kind of goes for heart disease too. Blood pressure can be tenuous, whereas someone may struggle with a high blood pressure when they get outside. They may become dehydrated, may actually drop their blood pressure because they've taken their medicines like they're supposed to, but they don't have that good hydration status. And I think the other thing that we just have to keep in mind too, and patients are really good at this, is the heat can affect our medications too, effectively reducing the ability of the insulin to be as active as it should be. Of course, and also the medications like some of the heart medicines make us urinate more, which once again just kind of adds that process of dehydration. So I think it's just doing the things we've talked about, staying hydrated, wearing the appropriate clothing, picking the good times to go outside, a common theme, but realizing that our resilience is not quite as good as it is outdoors.
Dr. Byrd, I'd like to add a part to that. What about if your children have diabetes or have some condition? How about managing them as they go outside, probably more than they would during the regular school year? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, I think it's a similar theme, but with kids, they just don't have quite as much resilience too, really. And so they're smaller, their temperatures can rise faster than adults. And so you just have to be really careful. And so I think good hydration, for diabetes in particular, more frequent monitoring of the blood sugar. I do trips to around the equator, and we always have to think about that when we're monitoring the blood sugar. Is our supplies actually working like they're supposed to? Because the heat can inactivate. So I think it's just being more aware of what we're dealing with in terms of like the blood sugar in children, maybe checking it a little more frequently, and just trying to avoid those extremes, and realizing they just don't have the same capacity to handle those extremes as an adult may be able to.
Good deal. Thank you. We're going to go to Dr. Robinson. Dr. Robinson, the sun is out, bad sunburn. Maybe they meant to put on the sunscreen that you told them to put on, and they didn't put it on, or not as often. So if you get a bad sunburn, how would you treat it? And when should you seek additional care?
Yeah, sometimes sunburns can be pretty tough. When you're talking about sunburns, you're talking about UV radiation. And there is not a ton that you can do for it. But I mean, the main thing that you can do is Tylenol, which is also known as acetaminophen, if we're just to make sure that we're clear on talking about the right medications, ibuprofen, Tylenol. Those are things that you can that you can do for mild pain. Now, sometimes when you get a really bad sunburn, and I had this experience about 20 years ago, I promise you it changed my life. It set off this inflammatory response that can cause extreme itching, or you refer to, if you're like looking it up on Google or whatever, pruritus. It can set off an inflammatory condition in the skin where you itch significantly. And really the thing that you can do with that is take Benadryl. You don't want to take too much Benadryl. You want to, because that can cause another whole host of problems. But you obviously want to follow the directions, on the bottle when you're taking over the counter Benadryl. So the main things that you can do are supportive care. Now, you can apply calamine lotion to the skin. You can do some, over the counter aloe vera. These are things that are all somewhat soothing. But in regards to medications you can take, it's really Tylenol and ibuprofen. If this gets to the point where the itching is significant, steroids can be used. It's a little bit controversial whether people want to use them, whether they use them or not, but on a case-by-case basis, that's something that obviously you're going to need to talk to your physician about if that kind of inflammatory response ramps up more than what you would normally expect, like I experienced about 20 years ago. So really it's over-the-counter treatments. It's Tylenol, ibuprofen, Benadryl as needed for, significant itching that's associated with that inflammatory response. But once again, it goes back to kind of preventative things. Wear sunscreen, wear a hat, wear sunglasses. And when we were talking about when you're exercising earlier, when your clothes get wet, and I may have mentioned this previously, when your clothes get wet, they allow more UV radiation in. So that's where kind of those synthetic clothes will make a difference when you're outside exercising, or if you're at the pool, or if you're at the beach, or whatever the case may be.
Good deal. Thank you, Dr. Robinson. We're going to go to Dr. Sease. All right, the water is going to be a major part of this summer vacations. We all know that. So at what age can we teach a child to swim?
So I'm going to start by saying making learning to swim a priority for your family. Drowning is one of the leading causes of death in children. And so please, please, please make learning to swim a priority for your family. You can teach your child to swim as early as 1 year of age. Less than 1 year, they're not really learning a skill. They may be doing some reflexive things, but 1 year old and above, actually you can do swimming lessons, and is endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics to start at the age of 1. Your child does need to be developmentally and emotionally kind of ready, and you will know that if they're terrified of water. Giving them swim lessons is probably not the right thing to do at 1 year of age, but kind of exposing to them that is probably appropriate. Most kids are developmentally ready at 4, right? So some are ready at 1, but most kids by 4 should be able to learn how to swim. If you haven't taught them to swim by age 5 or 6, again, it really needs to be a priority, because this can be a life-saving endeavor for your family. So really, really want to stress that. And I will say also, even though I'm stressing swim lessons does not make your child drown proof, right? It's just one of the layers of drowning prevention that we use, but again, should absolutely be a priority. You can start at 1, and if you haven't started by 5 or 6, you need to get started.
Good, thank you. Dr. Holloway. Dr. Holloway, in my neighborhood, there are little kids and their families on golf carts. They're all over the place. There's lots of conversations about it. So how can we keep kids safe while riding in a golf cart?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I've seen quite a few golf cart accidents causing different injuries. I think one, it's respecting golf carts as a vehicle and the injuries can occur. I think understanding that you do have to have a license in South Carolina to drive one. So not allowing younger kids that don't know how to drive one. Unfortunately, we do see a much higher, about 3 times higher rate of kids getting injured than adults. And so a lot of this has to do with the seating inside, not holding on, not having seatbelts on, overloading, standing on the side. Those sort of things are the most common ways that we see these injuries happen. And unfortunately, these injuries are very traumatic, and almost half of them result in some sort of hospitalization, ER visit, or even death. And so unfortunately, we have seen the death rate increase with golf cart accidents. So I think making sure that you teach your kids about those and to respect it and sit in them properly, no one drive fast, obey all the traffic codes would be the best advice from that standpoint.
Good deal. Thank you. I hope people are listening about the golf carts. All right, we're going to Dr. Byrd. Dr. Byrd. All right, so tell us about what the difference is between some of the common skin rashes.
Yeah, it's summertime, and so we see a lot of rashes in the office. And so the first thing that comes to mind in terms of frequency of what I see are the poison ivy, poison oak, and stomach rash. And I think the best thing for this is just avoidance, wearing long clothes. And if you are going to be outside in the forest or wherever, knowing what these plants look like. And, you know, I just pull out my phone and Google it if I'm going to walk into the forest to make sure that I'm avoiding those plants. But if you think that you might be in an area around a riverbed that may have poison plants, then make sure that you just wash off as soon as you get home. Because it's an oil, you can wash it with some soap and water, and usually prevention is the best key there. So certainly that's one of the main things we look at or think about, I should say, in the summer. And then, you know, a lot of skin gets irritated just from being in the heat. You know, you've heard about heat rash before. It's, you know, it also can be avoided by some of the things we've already talked about. Wearing loose clothing and, you know, obviously keeping the skin, you know, cleaning yourself off after you get inside, and staying cool and avoiding the extremes of the temperature, all those kind of things. And then, you know, acne gets a lot worse in the summertime. And so the skin is oily, and that oily skin and the bacteria gets irritated. And so washing with, you know, being careful about rubbing your hands over your face, and using a rag perhaps to dab your skin, and then obviously just, you know, getting cleaned up with the oily after you've been outside and such like that. There's a lot of other things that we see. We've already kind of talked about sunburns, but those are the main things that we see in the summertime in regards to rashes.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Robinson. All right, Dr. Robinson, some people may be going camping this summer. What are some of the safety hazards in addition to the ones we've already been talking about, like drink so much water? That's a common theme today. What are some of the safety hazards to keep in mind if you're camping?
Tammy, we could talk about this for an hour. Literally, there's so many safety hazards. You know, first off, kind of like Dr. Byrd was kind of explaining, obviously you're going to come into maybe some contact with poison ivy, poison oak. So you got to kind of be prepared for that. But I think the first thing that really comes to mind, there are a couple of really, really serious issues we're going to talk about. But I mean, ticks, mosquitoes, snakes. I mean, those are the big things that we've already kind of touched on. Ticks, we kind of know what to do from that standpoint. I have a feeling we're going to talk about snakes a little bit more. And so I will kind of save that, and we can talk about that in a little bit coming up. And then mosquitoes. So making sure you have some sort of bug spray, make sure you're protecting yourself, look in your sleeping bag, make sure there's not a snake in it. Those are things that you need to look out for. And then obviously if you come in contact with a tick, properly removing that and seeing your physician, you know, if you develop a subsequent rash and things of that nature. Also, one of the big things is if you're going camping, let someone know where you are. I mean, whether you take a screenshot, you know, of exactly where you are when you're going out on a trail, let people know. I do a lot of work in the pre-hospital field, and it is always, you know, throughout the year, it's someone getting lost because their cell phone won't work and you don't have service. So it's just really vitally important to let a family member know exactly where you are. Burn injuries, campfires, you have to be extremely careful, whether it's putting out your fire, making sure it's secured in, but burns are a significant concern that you need to, a really big hazard that you have to look out for while you're camping. Drowning, like Dr. Sease, I believe, talked about. These are just things, if you don't know how to swim and you're camping near a lake or a river, you have got to be really cognizant of what your surroundings are. If you get up in the middle of the night, maybe you walk to go use the restroom or something, you don't want someone to potentially slip in some sort of body of water and not be able to get out. Bear spray whistles. I'm assuming that people are camping here in South Carolina, not that you can't come into contact with a bear, but certainly if you're camping somewhere that has more prevalence of larger animals like bears, if you're in Canada, you're in Vancouver, and you're some of these other places, that is something you have to also be cognizant of, and also storing your food properly, so that you might not have an unwanted visitor, while you're camping in the middle of the night. So those are the main things I would bring up. And if you're glamping, I'm not a big camper, but if you have a generator, for instance, I know we're kind of getting out there. That's not a real safety hazard you would normally think of, but you've got to make sure that you're not sleeping close to a generator and exposing yourself to carbon monoxide. So these are just a couple of, those are a couple of little outliers outside the normal things that you would think of in regards to like ticks, mosquitoes, and things of that nature.
Thank you. Dr. Sease.
Yes.
All right. So what about, we were talking about swimming earlier. How can you stay safe when swimming in liver? God, sorry about that, y'all. I don't think we swim there, but anyway, how can you stay safe when swimming in rivers and lakes versus the ocean versus backyard pools?
Yeah, so I'm going to refer to those other ones as like open water swimming. And so when you think about open water swimming, you need to be really careful to only swim in designated areas. So when they'll tell you where it's safe to swim in those. So don't go into places that are not designated for swimming. Just don't do it, right? Preferably go where there's a lifeguard, just so you have somebody who can come and rescue you. If something were to happen. Never swim alone in open water. Someone should know where you're going to be. So again, to Dr. Robinson's point with that. And then when in doubt, get out, right? If it doesn't feel right, if the current feels too strong or there's something else going on and you feel like it's murky or you're just not comfortable, get out of the water, right? So just use your common sense in terms of that. You should know the weather and the water conditions, especially if you're in a lake that you're familiar with or something like that. Know again where the drop-offs are, know where their rocks might be. So in terms of diving and those kinds of things, but knowing the weather is really important. So look at the forecast and know to not go out when there's thunder and lightning, or there's going to be a storm coming and you can't get out in an appropriate amount of time. If you're in the ocean, make sure you understand the currents, right? Don't swim against the current ever. You can get exhausted by doing that. So you always want to swim with the current and parallel to the shore. Watch out when it says no swimming here because of riptides. Don't get in that part of the water. You should never swim when you're drinking alcohol in those open water spaces. Preferably you shouldn't swim when you're drinking alcohol anyway. Our faculties are not as good as they normally are, right? And we don't appreciate the dangers with that. And then our response time to help somebody else if we're drinking would be limited. And then of course, in open water and in pools, use an appropriate life vest, right? Use an approved life vest to be out there. You should not be in those open waters, deep in those open waters without that. And for a pool, you don't want to be complacent near a pool, a backyard pool, right? You should always have an assigned water watcher for that. So if there's young children, who's watching the kids, right? They should not have a cell phone. They should not be drinking. You should know who that person is watching the kids. If you need to go into the bathroom, the kids need to get out of the pool, right? And they need to be sitting in a designated side, someplace outside of where they can get back in the water. So again, someone should always be laying eyes on those children. You can wear a water watcher band, you can have a hat, but somebody needs to be designated as the person watching the child. And then when you're not in the pool, when you're cooking out in the backyard or you're doing whatever, you need to limit access to that pool. Kids can go out so quickly and get in the water and drown. It takes seconds to drown. You just really need to be really careful and know where those children are and always have a designated person watching them.
That's some good tips. I know that the scary part is having water around you. Dr. Holloway, we're going to be grilling. So what are the safety tips for outdoor grilling and picnics?
So this topic is one that I guess was chosen for me, but I would never choose to grill myself because I feel like
I think we may have lost Dr. Holloway, so we may have to come back to him. So we'll hold that question and see if we get him back in a second. We'll go to Dr. Byrd. Dr. Byrd, how do pool chemicals prevent illness? And how should you handle pool chemicals at your home?
This is a great question because it's getting hot, as we've talked about over and over again. And so everyone wants to get into the water in the pool. And I think that's a very reasonable thing. I love going to the pool, but pool chemicals can be dangerous. And so the best thing is, just as if you would treat any chemical at home, is prevention, keeping it out of reach. If we're talking about kids in particular, or animals, you know, and in a safe place, you know, this kind of thing. But, you know, the thing that I like to talk about when we're talking about the pools is just making sure that your pool is appropriately chlorinated, so that you can be safe from illnesses and such that can be transmitted through the water. A lot of us are guilty of not showering before we get inside the pool. I have to admit that there's been times I've gotten in the pool and not showered before. And the reason why we do this, it seems obvious, but no one does it or thinks about it. The reason we do this is when we go to the bathroom and wipe, we probably aren't getting as clean as we might in a shower. And so when we get into the pool, we carry those fecal components into the water. And that's why it's good that our pool is chlorinated. But if your pool is not adequately chlorinated and you get exposed to whatever's floating in the water, whether it be you know, urine or fecal stuff, you know, then you can get sick. And so we just encourage folks that are having issues with their stomach, like diarrheal illnesses, and kids, not to get in the water in the first place, so they won't be exposed to this. And anyways, so I think it's safe to just, you know, keep the chemicals out of reach. And realize that sometimes the chlorine can be irritating to the skin. And so rinsing off after you've been in the pool, as we talked about on the skin stuff, but also it can be irritating to some people's breathing, particularly if you're in an indoor pool or you're a competitive swimmer, you're gonna be in the water a lot. And so just things like asthma or COPD or emphysema can flare up if you're exposed to those chemicals for a long period of time. So just being aware of this. If someone ever gets exposed to a harmful substance, I always tell my parents that that I call poison control. When they call me, I call poison control. So, you know, poison control is not very far away, and they always give great advice. And so you can keep that number handy. I used to hand the number out to my parents, but you can actually Google and get it in 2 seconds. And call poison control if you ever have any questions. Kids will get themselves into any number of things.
Thank you, Dr. Byrd. What about the saltwater pools? I have a couple of friends who have pools at their homes that are saltwater pools. I guess that's what they call them. How's that different?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same idea of, you know, probably exposure to those substances that you clean the pool with would not be good, and you want to make sure that it's actually protecting. But they have recommendations, you know, the pool companies and whatnot, as to what concentration they want it to be to prevent illnesses. I just think it's just important that you make certain that you're testing your pool and that you're protected, particularly if you're having friends and other folks get into the water that may or may not be showering before they get in. You just kind of use your imagination there. So.
All right, thank you. We're going to go back to Dr. Holloway. All right, Dr. Holloway, we were talking about outdoor grilling and picnics. So what do we do to stay safe related to outdoor grilling and picnics?
yes. So I was saying that grilling is something I don't really enjoy that much because I feel like it's a lot of stress of making sure you cook the food right, but not per taste, but try to prevent food poisoning. So a lot of meats, fishes, those sort of things have to be cooked to a certain degree in order to kill the bacteria and harmful substances on them. And so making sure that we cook them based on their recommendations. So usually the packaging says that. A lot of thermometers actually have settings for the different meats, fishes, those sort of things, chicken, to make sure we cook them to the right temperature. Some of the things that I think about when trying to do this is making sure the heat source is appropriate. So you might think, well, this normally takes me about 30 minutes, but the grill isn't as hot as it was before, so it won't get to the same internal temperature. I know a lot of people will be cooking for a lot of folks at one point, so that then if you have all these different things on there, if you start, putting on hamburgers on one end and then get to the other ones, and there's interruptions, then those last hamburgers might not be cooked as much. So you think, oh, the first one's done, so I got to take them all off. And so those are all things to do. I personally always try to taste test them also to make sure that they're okay. But again, the main thing would be cooking them to the right temperature in order to avoid food poisoning as much as possible.
What about burns related to grilling,
Yeah.
Dr. Holloway?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where different ones with the grilling would be like charcoal, which has a little bit more control, slow burn versus the propane tanks where I had that experience too, where again, my propane wasn't going as well. So things weren't cooking as well, even though it had been 30 minutes. So I cranked it all up, and then all that propane had like boiled up. So when I started it engulfed, burned a couple hairs, that sort of thing. So being very safe with that, wearing safety gloves while reaching in there. So again, all aspects of the grill would be hot. Kids coming around trying to see what you're cooking, so trying to get them away, and where the grill is on your porch, that sort of thing. So I have heard of fire starting because again, they were under something or too close to things that caught on fire. So all important safety things when it comes to grilling.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. All right, you talking about some snakes and spider bites. How common are snakes and spider bites, and when should you seek medical care if you've been bitten?
Tammy, I can't even hardly think about snake bites. I'm still thinking about hosing my kids off for an extra 10 minutes after listening to Dr. Byrd talk. I'm gonna drown my own kids in my
all
driveway.
summer.
So things with snakes and spider bites. First off, they're not that common. Okay, everybody always thinks it's a spider bite. It's usually not a spider bite. Okay, it is usually not. We'll start with spiders. Now, if you get bit by a black widow spider, extremely rare, right? I mean, this is the one that's black, has an hourglass pattern on it. Now, it can cause some significant symptoms, and you need to seek medical care for that. I would go to the actual emergency department for that, because you can have significant abdominal rigidity and vomiting and altered mental status. So a black widow spider bite, if you can identify it, which it is a very identifiable spider, is black with a red hourglass on it, that is significant. Now, everyone always thinks that they get bit by a brown recluse spider, but here's the facts. We live in South Carolina. It is not an endemic spider to South Carolina. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in South Carolina, but they've done studies, and they might identify a brown recluse spider in South Carolina around 10 times a year. It is just not an endemic spider to South Carolina. Now, you may be somewhere else. Those spiders can cause like a necrosis to your wound. That's not going to develop immediately. That's going to be over several days. But if you're seeing that, then you need to go see your doctor to get that evaluated. Back to snakes. Nothing ever good started by, hey guys, watch this. Don't go grab a snake. I don't care whether it's poisonous. If it's not poisonous, if you think you're a snake expert, you're probably not. Just don't go mess with a snake. And so if you get bit by a snake, I always encourage people. Of course, some people may kill it. We've had people show up to the emergency department. They put these snakes in Tupperware containers and everything else. I'm deathly afraid of snakes. We're going to get rid of it very quickly, okay? But if you can take a picture of it, I think that does help us a lot in the emergency department, because what we're trying to make a decision on is, do we need to give anti-venom or not? And my recommendation would be, if you're bitten by a snake, you need to get evaluated. And certainly, if you know, for instance, that this is a non-poisonous snake and you get bitten, you may be well knowledgeable about your snakes. But if you start having swelling that crosses any type of joint surface, so if you're bitten on your foot and swelling crosses your ankle, if you're bitten on your hand, it crosses your wrist joint, you need to get you need to be seen immediately. Now, some of the other myths that are out there, for goodness sakes, don't let someone suck the venom out of your snake bite. Okay. We don't do that. So that always comes up. Should we suck the poison out? Absolutely not. That's a universal recommendation there. We don't apply tourniquets to snake bites. Some people still think, okay, they're bitten on their arm by a rattlesnake or a copperhead, I'm going to put a belt tourniquet on there. We do not recommend tourniquets. We do not use tourniquets in snake bites. You need to get evaluated in the emergency department for a snake bite. And then finally, what I'd recommend is, just because if it's a smaller snake, if it's a poisonous smaller snake, they actually can produce a more envenomous snake bite, because smaller snakes cannot control, more of a juvenile snake cannot control their venom like adult snakes can. So just don't think that if you get bit by a smaller poisonous snake, that it's not as dangerous, because it can sometimes be more dangerous. So you need to get evaluated in that situation.
Good, thank you. I think I'm just gonna stay in this summer. Dr. Sease. All right, spray tans or sunless tanner lotions, are they safe?
Overall, yes, right? It's way better than having your teen, and I'm going to pick on teens because I have a teenage daughter who loves to suntan. Much better than having them go out and lay in the sun endless hours, and certainly using oils to try to get tan. So the spray tans last longer, but I think it's important for teens and their parents to know, right? The spray tan offers you absolutely zero protection from a sunburn. So even though you look tan, that doesn't mean you can go out and get any more sun. You still need to apply sunscreen with that. Some of the sunless tanning lotions do now come with sunscreen, but again, they have to be reapplied just like you would apply. You have to continue to apply sunscreen like normal. So overall, yes, they're safe. And certainly I would recommend that over going out and tanning. The one thing that I think is important for everyone to know, tanning beds absolutely are not safe, right? So under no circumstances should you or your teen go into a tanning bed. That's like 10 times the UV radiation that you would get from laying out in the sun. And so they're actually banned for adolescents to go and use tanning beds for that reason. So absolutely, spray tans are fine. They last longer, they're more expensive, and the sunless tanning lotions are also okay and safe. You just need to know they absolutely offer no protection from the sun. So if you're out in the sun, you still need to apply sunscreen.
Thank you. All right, I'm going back to Dr. Robinson. Dr. Robinson's question came in about why would you be looking for swelling over joints? You had said that can you explain that again? Like, why would you be looking for that?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're truly, let's say you're bitten by a poisonous snake, one thing's, just because you're bitten by a poisonous snake, you need to come get evaluated in the emergency department. The first thing that we're going to do for that is we're going to check some of your basic blood work. We're going to see how the clotting factors are working in your blood. And it may be that, even though you may be bit by a poisonous snake, if it's a small localized bite, we may not treat it with antivenom. Antivenom is relatively safe when we start talking about crofab, which is going to treat your major snakes, venomous snakes that you would see here in South Carolina, in North America. Your rattlesnake, your copperheads, things of that nature. Now, certain people go out to these snake shows and they may buy snakes. We've had to have antivenom flown in from zoos in Miami and around the country for people who have these pet snakes that are venomous, because there's no law that requires that you have to supply your own antivenom. We're very fortunate that the zoo here in Columbia carries a lot of rare antivenom, but I'm sorry that I kind of digressed on that point. Going back to, if you're actually bitten by a poisonous snake, what we look for is progression of that bite. We look at your laboratory studies, we look to see if your blood's clotting appropriately, but as soon as that swelling crosses a joint surface or you have any lab abnormalities, you're going to get antivenom at that point. And we start with 4 vials. Antivenom is extremely expensive too. Obviously it's covered by insurance and things, and that's not the purpose of this conversation, but we'll usually start with 4 vials of antivenom, and you're talking about $20,000 right off the bat. I mean, I'm not a toxicologist like some of my partners, but I mean, we've used upwards of 30 vials of antivenom on patients with extremely venomous snake bites. So that is kind of what we use in the emergency department to see, obviously, your laboratory studies that we discussed. But if the snake bite is progressing, we're going to mark it. We're going to see where the swelling is. And as soon as if it is progressing, that's when we're going to start getting extremely aggressive with our treatment. But certainly if it crosses a joint surface, because that can be destructive to your joints, you're going to have local destruction in those areas. It can also attack your joints in regards to whether it's a major joint, a knee, wrist, ankle. And that is when we use that as kind of a criteria of when we're going to get aggressive with our treatment and not.
Thank you. We appreciate that additional information. All right, Dr. Holloway, is there a proper way to pack a cooler that keeps your food safe to eat?
Yes, make sure you don't let snakes in there.
No snakes.
Yes. So the main thing with coolers is trying to obviously keep things cool. It doesn't matter as much when it's drinks, just your personal preference, but that's when we start really getting concerned is when it deals with meats or again, things that can expire, things with mayonnaise on them, those sort of things. And so trying to keep them cool is what we want to do. So sometimes actually having two coolers, one with drinks, one with the more special tea items inside of it, because the cooler with the drinks will be opened all the time, letting things out. Making sure you have plenty of ice. So they do recommend with the meats and things like that, making sure that you have 2-to-1 ice ratio, because again, the ice melting is what's going to keep it cool. Using special things like even a top that you can place on top of everything that you put in there, that then will act as like an insulation cooling thing, is something you could buy. But again, if you're concerned that things will expire because you're going to be out there all day, can be an important thing. And then even how you're starting with your cooler. So some people will store their cooler out in the garage, which will be really hot. And then you're putting ice in it, it will melt more quickly. So trying to bring your cooler in for the night before you pack it up are all little things that can help you make sure that your food stays the appropriate temperature.
Good. So now we don't have any questions. I'm going to go back to all of our spokespersons and let them have a final thought. So since you're on the screen, Dr. Holloway, final thoughts about summer safety?
Yeah, so again, unfortunately, in my line of work, I do see a lot of injuries that occur from it, but using this time wisely to enjoy your vacation, but being prompt to it, and then making sure that your kids are getting plenty of exercise and being well overall is kind of our main goal.
Dr. Byrd, final thoughts?
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. Have fun is the first thing I'd say. And this sounds all scary if you put all this together, but have fun in the summer is the first thing I'd say. The other thing is use Google and talk with your doctors. Don't end with Google, but look up things that you're curious about. And I love it when patients come in and say, I was reading, and what do you think about this? Because I think that's what your doctor is for, especially your pediatrician.
Good. And with that, I'll go to a pediatrician. Dr. Sease.
Yes, so I think I'm going to just use this opportunity as another PSA for swim lessons, right, and water safety. We have so many great places in South Carolina, particularly here in the Upstate, and then lots of people have pools, and drowning is unfortunately way too common. So please, 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 eyes on kids all the time. Use life vests, and then also wear your helmet when you're riding your bike.
Dr. Robinson, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've highlighted a lot of things here. Certainly hose your kid off before they get in the pool and after the pool. I've learned that today. And, I've got 2 kids. They're really injury prone. The only other thing I would add we didn't talk about is put a helmet on your child. I mean, if you're riding a bike or if they're on any type of ATV, anything of that nature, I mean, like helmets save lives. We see devastating head injuries we see them all year long, but we see a lot of them in the summer, and they're heartbreaking because that a lot of this could be prevented potentially if they were wearing a helmet, or just if they had a little bit more supervision, or if they were a little bit more safety conscious. So I would just throw a little quick plug in for helmets, so you don't end up in Dr. Holloway's concussion clinic.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our physicians for joining us today. Thank you to those who are watching it live on Facebook. So thank y'all. And we'll look forward to having you all at our next town hall. And we hope that you all have a great summer, but be safe out there. So thanks, and everybody have a great day.